Once or twice, gentlemen.
One time.
One time.
I prefer twice. If,
so shut up.
If we go twice.
I never go.
Okay.
There's a heart.
I just fucking run good one time in this stupid place.
Oh my God. He said run it once and then asked if they would run it twice. What just happened here? Did Mariano do something shady? I'm Bart Hansen from Crush Live Poker, and I want to take a look at a hand that was recently played a couple of weeks ago on the Hustler Casino Live ante-game featuring popular poker vlogger Mariano.
I'll take that. I'll drag down like just. I'll drag down just the antes and feel good.
Come on, come on, come on.
Mariano wakes up with the queens. We're going to see a big pot. $200 straddle is on.
Hopefully you have a king.
And Mike X may just put the money in here. $200 straddle on, starting about 65 big blinds here. And Francisco with ace king as well. We're going to see a big pot.
Where is that?
Francisco makes a cold call. I imagine at this stack depth, Mike X just puts the money in. Dead money out there.
Every time I tried to watch, I had to turn it on.
Yeah.
Starting this hand at about 65 bigs with a $200 straddle on.
And I don't think he wasn't.
Imagine he just puts it in. There goes, all in.
No cues.
No cues. Can I get a count, please?
So we pick it up here in the ante game, and this is just a huge, huge game. 5-5 with 100 ante. There's already a straddle out there to 200. This game sometimes plays like 100, 200, no limit, if not bigger. You can see the stack sizes, and what kind of starts this hand off is that Mike X is pretty short for the game. He picks up ace-king offsuit, raises it up to 4x. Mariano here, you know, he's got pocket queen, so it's just a slam dunk 3-bet. He goes to 2,400, noticing that Mike is probably not all that deep. And then he gets back around here to Francisco the Pro. Francisco the Pro also picks up ace-king, and he's going to flat call. And this is one of the things I go often over in Crush Live Poker. If you sort of want to clean up your pre-flop game, there's nothing wrong with just playing a 4-bet or fold style facing a 3-bet. There are certain times where you can cold call with hands, and these guys are relatively deep, but it's very, very rare. His hand kind of looks like maybe some ace-queen, some ace-king, maybe like 10s, jacks, something like that. And it gets back around here to Mike X, and this is just an absolutely no-brainer all in. There's already almost $6,000 in dead money in the pot. If you are ever the initial raiser and somebody cold calls a 3-bet in the field, you're really incentivized to 4-bet, and this is just a slam dunk 4-bet here by Mike X. That is just an absolute no-brainer. And now it's back over here to Mariano, and he has a decision because the raising is open back up, and he's got Francisco, who called behind him.
Oh, so she doesn't have to get up all the way. And...
I appreciate it so much.
If you're Mariano, you got Francisco behind you.
Any more white over there?
Yeah.
Sorry?
For 65 bigs, I don't think you can fold queens.
Oh, Francisco.
Is that good?
Action is over here right now. Okay?
150.
Okay.
150, 160.
Well, Mariano, I'm trying to shut out Francisco behind, and I'm just raising here.
13, 8, 65.
Well, if I'm Mariano, I just jam.
Gotcha.
Well, if I'm Mariano with aces here, I just call to keep Francisco in behind. I think this one's a little bit different than the cold 4-bet pot when we saw Mergy cold 4-bet Mariano. You're just not going to see guys cold 4-bet unless they have aces or kings. But when it goes open 3-bet and then the original opener 4-bets are going to be a lot wider than aces or kings. Guys will just put in ace-king. Whereas you see like Francisco just cold calls with the ace-king. So a cold 4-bet is much stronger than a 4-bet from the original opener. Just much, much stronger. And Mike X starting this hand at about 65 big blinds effective. With queens, you're just not folding. You're 65 bigs. You also have the overlay of Francisco's dead money behind, and Francisco just never has aces or kings here. So and let's call, and now Francisco moves all in behind. Snap all in.
Once or twice, gentlemen.
So obviously Mario now has a decision to make here. He could just flat call. He could just move all in over the top to shut out Francisco. Like the commentator, Mark Goon, Squish My Tomato, frequent Crush Live poker coach and contributor, said, I kind of like an all in to really shut Francisco out of the hand, because there is going to be some hands that are going to have equity against queens. Like if you had aces or kings, specifically aces, I think I like this more as a trap to induce somebody to move all in behind you. You know, if Mariano had aces here and Francisco just snap jam with ace king, that's great. But with queens here, fading some overcards, things like that, Mariano probably thought that he had Francisco dominated in terms of something like, you know, pocket jacks, pocket tens. But he eventually does just call. He plays it tricky, and then he gets what he wants. Francisco just snap moves all in, and of course, this is what starts the controversy.
Once or twice, gentlemen.
One time.
One time.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes.
And we are going to see a monster pot, 107,000.
Something different. I want to come over this.
I need somebody to sit down behind me.
Hey, you're blocking the camera.
Mike, you want to show?
Huh?
You want to show?
Uh-oh, I'm in trouble. I think you might have to. Really? Yeah. Wait, can we go multiple times?
Everyone has to agree to it. That's correct.
Are you guys okay with going twice? Are you okay with it, Francisco? Or what do you?
I'm okay with two eyes, done.
I prefer twice. If
Also, shut up.
Okay, me and you will do twice.
Everyone
I think
has to agree to
Mike,
it.
are you okay if we go twice?
I never go.
One time.
But we, hey,
But you got.
Mariano.
I'm okay with you.
Cannot.
No?
Everyone-
Okay.
She
No,
said-
and our money.
She
Our
said.
money.
She said everyone,
Everyone
has to agree.
No, Mariano, but our money separate. We can go our. No? Okay, let's do it. Thank you.
One time, yes.
Here we go.
All right. So there's a lot going on here, and I have some very, very strong opinions and feelings about whether this was proper or improper. So obviously, Mariano calls. He got what he wanted, and then he said one time. And then a couple seconds later, he says in his vlog that, you know, he realized how big the pot was. He asked if people would run it twice. He said, I prefer to run it twice. Mike X said, I only run it once. And Lauren, the dealer, said that everyone has to agree to run it more than once, because Mariano and Francisco were inquiring if they could run it twice on the side. More on that at the end, whether or not Mariano and Francisco can run the side twice, and why, I'm going to get a little nerdy, why the main pot can only be run one time. But the whole point of this is that Mariano gains absolutely no advantage by doing what he did. First of all, it's ridiculous. All he said was, okay, I'll run it once. Then he asked, do they run it twice? Do you guys want to run it twice? He's just leaving it up to them. Now, he obviously saw both of their hands, or he saw Francisco's hand, or on if you saw Mike X's hand later here. But now he's just proposing, do you want to run it twice? So if they all agreed to run it twice, it wouldn't even make a difference. But this is really one of the most misunderstood concepts, and it's amazing because I am going to pull up a lot of comments in the YouTube section. Now, I will say, when I do videos, especially critiquing type videos, I absolutely look in the comments. And I put up a video, I'll put a link to it here, from last week on Garrett and the whole good call thing and him not fast rolling his hand over. And I reviewed a lot of the comments. And it was one of the most disliked videos that I have actually ever done. And I will say that I took away some really valuable information from those comments. So if you did watch that video, I have a few things to say. I by no means meant to say that Charles, who is the guy that didn't roll his hand over, had done anything wrong. I was actually just trying to get into Garrett's head. And I think the commenters made some very important points that the reason why Charles did not fast roll his hand over was because he didn't know if calling with ace king high might actually not be the best hand. Now, I was looking at it from the perspective of, I didn't think Garrett would say good call with anything better than ace king, but Charles didn't know that. And most of the people were sort of in a consensus and said that that's the reason why Charles didn't fast roll his hand over. And I was just trying to sort of get into Garrett's mind. And to be honest with you, at the end of the day, I don't really feel all that strongly about that particular whole situation, but I appreciate the feedback. However, let's take a look at some of the comments that came up on this particular video, and this really got me on this whole topic. And there was some immediate reaction that Mariano made a shady play, because once he saw what his opponents held, he changed his mind to run it twice. Mario wanted to run it one time and then changed to run it twice. LOL. Mariano wanted to go once until he saw that they were blocking each other's outs. LOL. Then it's always one time for him. Ha ha ha. I did not like Mariano saying once, then changing his comment to twice once he saw the cards. Super shady. And then Mariano, after seeing some of these initial comments, I think felt the need to come on and say, for anyone wondering, I wanted to run it once until I realized the pot was huge, had nothing to do with Francisco. And I believe that, but we'll talk about why that is. But now let's take a look at the responses to Mariano's pinned comment. Lies, you thought you had him dominated. Great excuse, grow up, kid. You're full of it. How did you realize the pot was huge after seeing what Francisco had? Stop gaslighting everybody. He saw the cards twice, then he changed his mind. LOL. And it just goes on and on and on. And it just demonstrates how people do not understand that running the cards more than once does not change the equity of the hand. It only, we could say, decreases the variance, but what it does is it makes the outcome of the entire pot closer to the actual equity. There is no advantage to running it once, to running it twice. And even if Mariano had seen both of their cards, it makes no difference anyways. Now, let me break down why it doesn't make any difference. I'm going to make this as simple as possible, and hopefully you can learn something along the way about how easy it is to calculate math in your head, because I think a lot of people get really intimidated by percentages. So we're going to go to the blackboard here, and just bear with me because I'm going to make this very, very quick. Now, when you are multiplying by percentages, it is very, very easy to figure out the answer by using some quick shortcuts, including, and most importantly, just basically lopping off a zero. So here, what is 70% times 70%? All you have to do is take off the zero. If you know single digit multiplication tables, you can multiply percentages. 7 times 7 is 49. What is 60% times 60%? Well, 6 times 6 is 36. It's 36%. I'll show you another shortcut. What is 70% times 65%? This one's really, really easy. All you have to do is multiply 7 times 6, which is 42, which would be 70 times 60, and then just take half of 7. So 7 times 6 is 42, half of 7 is 3.5, and you get 45.5%. What is 80% times 35%? Well, we would simply multiply 8 times 3, which is 24, and we would take half of 8, and we would come up with 28. Those are some pretty simple things, and there's a reason why I am going over them. Now, we can even do some more shortcuts that are pretty close with numbers ending in 5 in terms of percentage. You're like 65 times 65. Oh my God. What am I going to do with that? Well, what you could do is just multiply 6 times 6 for 36, and then take the percentage that you're multiplying and add it, in this case, 36, and you get 42.5. Now, that is not exactly correct. It's actually 42.25, but it's close enough for our purposes. Now, why am I bringing all these percentages into this? Well, it gets to the root of this whole running it more than once, and how running it more than once will actually end up approaching the actual expectation of the hand. The more times you run it, the more the pot will be closer to what the expectation is in the particular hand. Now, I made a little chart in Microsoft Excel, and what this shows is the chances that hands with certain equity will win both, will lose both, will chop, or at least chop, as you can see right here. Now, I will say, before everybody jumps out at me, that this is based upon something that's independent trials, meaning if I were to flip a coin twice. The second time I flip a coin, it's entirely independent of the first time. That is not exactly the case with poker, because if you run it more than once in poker, the equities can slightly change on the second run based upon the cards that come out in the first run. But let's take a look at this really easily. If we were entirely independent and we had 80% equity, the chances that we win both times is 64%. Now, how do we come up with that? It's just 80% times 80%. And it works all the way down the line. 70% equity, 49% that we're going to win both. Now, this column here represents loses both. How do we figure that out? Well, if we're 80% to win, what are we to lose? Well, we're 20% to lose. So we would just take the percentage that we're going to lose and multiply it by itself, and we get 4%. For all you math guys out there, I think the term is base 10 or base 100 complement. Basically, you're just taking 100 and subtracting by your equity to find the chances that you lose. So if we know the chances that we're going to win both 64%, we lose both 4%, we're left with 32% more, right? Because it's 68, 100 minus 68. So 32% of the time we chop. And then here, we just add the times we chop to the times that we win, and we can say at least chops. This is a key column that I'm going to keep pointing back to. So if you have 80% equity and you run the board 2 times, you will at least chop 96% of the time. And it runs down the line with 70% equity. You're going to at least chop 91% of the time, and so on and so forth. No matter what your equity is, and this really gets to the crux of the whole issue, no matter what your equity is, if you run it twice, you will at least chop at a greater percentage than winning the pot if you were to just run it one time. And that's the whole point of running it more than once. The outcome will approach the actual expectation. Even when you go down to some of these numbers too, when you're a huge dog, 10%, you're going to chop at least 19% of the time. 20%, you're going to chop at least 36% of the time. So it doesn't matter if you're a favorite or an underdog. I always hear this argument, and it's so crazy as we're going to take a look here at the equities, that Mariano knew that because Francisco and Mike X both had ace king, he'd have a better chance to at least win half the pot, in which this case would profit because it was 3 ways. But that's the case with any equity situation. If he was 10%, he'd have a better chance to win some of the pot. By running it twice instead of once, what you're doing is giving yourself a chance to achieve some of the pot, but you're giving yourself less of a chance to achieve the whole pot. And more importantly, which for some reason is somehow lost on a lot of people, even when your odds go down to win the second run because you've won the first run, you have already achieved 50% of the pot if you're running it 2 times. So if you're an 80% favorite and the pot is $1,000 and you win the first run, you've won 100% of 500. You're running above the expectation that you are supposed to be at. And that is partially why when you look at it from the beginning of the runs, the equities don't change, because we're chopping the pot up by the number of times that we run it. Now let's pull up Poker Cruncher and take a look at some equities. Here is the actual hand matchup as it was turned over. Queens, ace king, and ace king. You can see that Mariano here is 64.5%. Now, one of the biggest things that I saw in the comments was, well, Mariano thought that both these guys had lower pairs. Once he saw that they both shared the same hand, he knew that like they were going to have more, he was going to have more of a chance to win it. So let's just say that instead of Mike X and Francisco both having ace king, let's say that one of them had jacks, one of them had tens. You can see here, it's still 4 outs. The equity doesn't even change all that much. So that whole argument is pretty much like entirely BS. So what if Francisco and Mike X had jacks and tens? It doesn't even change anything by that much. Going back to what the actual matchup here is, and this is really, really important. Let's say, for example, they all run it twice, and Francisco and Mike X do not catch an ace or a king on the first run, and I'm going to put in deuce, 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 and a 3 dead down here. how much does that change the equity in the second run? You can see it actually doesn't change it by all that much as people actually think in the second run. Mariano's only going down by like less than 2%. And the reason why his equity is even going down and the other guy's equity is going up is because now we have 5 more scene cards. So their outs are the same, but there's less of the deck to see. So and hence you see the equity go down. Now let's go the other way and say that Mike X and Francisco hit an ace or a king. So they win the first run. Now let's take a look at how much Mariano's equity goes up in the second run. It goes up by about 5%, not a whole lot. So one of the aces are dead, and here you can see deuce, 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 and one of the aces are dead. Now, as I was talking to you before about how if they had jacks and tens, it's not even that much of a difference. Let's say with queens, jacks, and tens, somebody actually hits one of their outs. So Mariano's equity goes up by like about 6.5 to 7%. So this is actually a better scenario for him, quote unquote. Again, I keep harping on the fact that the overall equity of the hand remains the same before the first runs, but that was one of the main arguments that was just absolutely really, really ridiculous. Now, overall, if you're running it twice and you win the first run, in general, your equity will go down the second time and vice versa. But that isn't always the case. Now, let's say you have aces versus kings and you decide to run it twice, or any other higher pocket pair than someone else with a lower pocket pair. You can see it's about 82 to 18. But in this particular example, let's take a look and set the dead cards where pocket kings actually hits a king, but aces makes a straight. So the king, queen, jack, 10, and deuce are dead. You can see that aces equity actually goes up even though they win the first run. And in an even more extreme example, let's say that kings flops quads. So 2 of the kings are dead, but aces makes a royal. King, king, queen, jack, 10 with 4 spades. You can see that aces goes up to 97%. So just because you win or lose the first run doesn't mean that you're actually going to get an equity advantage in the second run. In general, usually you will, but it's not always the case. Like here in the actual matchup, if Mariano had won the first run because he had queens full on an ace, ace, queen, deuce, deuce board, these are the cards that are dead, you can see that his equity goes up to 75%. Now let's take a look at a more common scenario here where you have a flush draw and you're going to run it twice with 2 cards to come, just a super dry flush draw against aces. We know a flush draw against an unknown hand, 65-35, like against one pair. So let's say you run it the first time and you brick out. So I have set 2 non-hearts dead. You can see that the equity only goes up by a little bit into the second run. And now let's say that you hit the first run. Now you see that your equity goes down by only a little bit on the second run. So the whole equity changing thing from run to run is not as big of a deal as people think, but it still doesn't change the overall equity before the runs because the pots are being chopped into 2. So back to this guy here. Of course, this was the whole independent events where, like a flipping of a coin, where one event has no correlation to the other event. But I made another chart here. Now this represents if you win the first run, your equity going down by 5%. So instead of 80 times 80, it's 80 times 75. And this is all this done out where if you win the first run, your equity goes down by 5% and also vice versa. And the thing that's of note compared to the first chart here is when the runs are not entirely independent, the chances of any equities, at least chopping, actually goes up. So you have more of a chance of at least winning part of the pot when the runs are not entirely independent. But again, what is lost on people is that if you win or lose the first run, you have achieved 100% of half the pot. So you're either running way above or way below expectation, which works into the second run, which is part of the reason why the XYDs don't change when you look at everything at the start of the runs. But anytime you have any equity and you're not drawing dead, you will have a better chance of at least achieving some of the pot the more times that you run it. All right, enough of that math stuff. I think that we can all agree that it doesn't matter what you hold, the equities will always remain the same, and the more times you run it, the more times you'll have a piece of the pot. Let's talk about the non-math stuff, why you might want to run it or not run it. Now, one can make the argument that for professionals, running it more than one time could be a slight advantage because overall you want to decrease your variance, you want to decrease your, say, risk of ruin over your life. Not an advantage against somebody else, but just an advantage for you. Overall, you would rather have everything end up being close to the expectation of what a decision can make. That's certainly a valid argument. There are other arguments against running it twice. Some that would say that if someone knows that you run it more than once, they might make moves on you. You might actually have less fold equity because they're more apt to call. Personally, for me, I think it really has to do with mental game. If you're a for-profit player and you have good mental game, on average, you're going to have better mental game than a recreational player that doesn't play all of the time. And if you were to lose the entire pot in whatever situation, whether you're ahead or behind, you will be able to take that loss better than the recreational player. And you might stay on your A game where some sort of non-full-time players, recreational players, will revert to a really bad game because they're going to go on tilt. That's why I don't really like to run it more than once. But there are also times, and Hustler Casino Live is a really good example of this, where you might have short-term bankroll issues. I'm talking about in-session bankroll type issues. Like if I fly across the country to Hustler Casino Live to play on the ante game, and let's say I only bring $50,000 with me because I'm not going to bring any more to play 5 hours a month, if I bust my, say, first buy-in, or if I get into a giant pot, if I were to lose the entire pot, I might not be able to play in the game anymore for the rest of the hours of the show. And I wouldn't want that to happen. So I would want to decrease my variance within that individual session. Now, what's interesting here is, in the end, Mariano just proposed, even though he said run it once, hey, do you guys want to run it twice? There was another extreme example of something like this happening on another live stream a few years ago, and I was actually at the table. On Live at the Bike, there was a situation where this guy named Harry agreed to run the cards twice, and what ended up happening was he had top pair and another guy had a set. They didn't see each other's hands. Then, when he saw that the other guy, which was actually Ludacris, who's a regular on Hustler Casino Live, had a set, right before they put out the turn card, he changed his mind. He said, oh, you have a set. Never mind. I'm going to run it only one time. Now, the thing is that because this is supposed to be a gentleman's agreement that's not enforced by the casino, the decision by default is always run it once. So if someone were to say, oh, I'll run it twice, and then after they see somebody's hand, they change it to once, it's going to be once. This was the opposite with Mariano, where he said once, then he was like, oh, do you guys want to run it twice? But because Mike X said once, then it's just going to be once. But I stuck up for Harry. People thought he was like the biggest angler in the world because he changed his agreement, quote unquote, from running it twice to running it once because he saw that the other guy had a set. And I think he thought there was no way that he could possibly win 2 times being so much of an underdog because, you know, he was like a 98% underdog. And of course, the reason why I'm bringing this up is that he changed it to run it once. And you know what happened? He made a backdoor flush and he won, and all hell broke loose. And I did an entire podcast of me being on the table and explaining that situation, which I'll put up in the YouTube link. I put it up for free. And if you like the free Crush Live Poker podcast that you hear there, consider subscribing. Now, lastly, I want to go back to this part.
Show?
Huh?
You want to show?
Uh-oh, I'm in trouble. I think you might have to. Really? Yeah. You got Jack showing.
Huh?
Wait, can we go multiple times?
Everyone has to agree to it. That's correct.
Are you guys okay with going twice? Are you okay with it, Francisco? Or what do you?
I'm okay with 2 ice, son.
I prefer twice. If you
Also,
guys
shut up.
Okay, me and you will do 2 ice.
Everyone
I think
has to agree.
Mike, are you okay if we go twice?
I never go.
One time.
But we, hey,
You got.
Mariano.
I'm okay with you.
Cannot.
No?
Everyone
Okay. No, and our money.
She
Our
said.
money.
She said everyone,
Everyone
has to agree.
No, Mariano, but our money separate. We can go our. No? Okay.
Okay, so what's going on here? What's Francisco talking about? Now, normally, if you have a situation where there's a multi-way all-in and there is a disagreement about running it more than once, normally the guys with the big stacks can at least run the side pot twice. So in this particular situation, we'll say Mike X is all in for 14, and these guys have another, 60 to 65,000, something like that in the pot. The main pot's 42, the side pot is, say, 60, 65. You would allow the large pots to be able to run it 2 times. Now, I don't know if there's a directive from above that told Lauren, the dealer, that all people have to agree in order to even run the side twice. One of the other things that I understand about the graphics is it might be a case where the graphics are not programmed where if the large stacks ran it twice on the side, it would screw up the stack sizes and the chip counts. We see that sometimes when somebody mucks the winning hand by mistake. They have to sort of manually go in and fix it. But I want to show you why all parties actually have to agree to run the main pot. All parties have to agree to run the pots that they are involved with. And a lot of people don't know why, because I will show you that if that's allowed, it actually will change the equities. Back to the chalkboard here. Now, this was actually a situation that happened to me in PLO that made me really think about this, but I'm going to put up the example here in Hold'em. So let's say that you have a main pot and the guy with top set, player C, is the short stack here. So everyone's in for 4,000 and he doesn't want to run it more than once. You've got top set, you've got middle set, and then you have a big draw. Let's also say that the 9 of clubs is dead. So player B, who is the second large stack, he has 0% equity. There's no way he can actually win the main pot in this given example. If you allow player A and player B to run the main pot twice, as well as the side, but they would be running the side twice, I'm sure. But if you say, and you see this in PLO, we're going to run everything. What can happen is if player A wins the first run, that will kill player C's hand. Remember, player C is only in, he's a short stack, he's only in for 1 run. If he wins the entire 12,000. If he loses, he wins 0. But if player A wins the first run, now the second run is for 6,000. Player C is out of there. And if the second run breaks out, player B will actually win half of the main pot, even though he had 0% equity 3 ways. That's sort of the clearest example I can give. But what ends up happening in this particular scenario, because player C is only in for the first run, his money should never be a part of a second run for the main pot, because if player C wins the first run, he wins all of it. So whoever of the big stacks wins run number 1 in this particular scenario, they have to play again for half of player C's money, which is not correct. Because if player C won run 1, the entire main pot would go to player C. So in this particular example, because player A is such a big equity favorite multi-way against player B, and this is the case for any type of hand matchup of the large stacks, whoever is the equity favorite 3 ways, is actually having their equity taken away from them because they should have won all of player C's money in the first run. And now you're basically taking half of player C's money and putting it into the second run and giving player B a chance to win it when he should have no shot at it whatsoever, because player C is really only in for the first run. to wrap this whole thing up, because I've been looking at a lot of sort of public comments, I want to bring up this tweet that this guy said in response to the fact that I said I was looking forward to dropping this video. This thing is great, and it wraps the entire thing into a bow. It doesn't matter if Mario saw the cards, if he didn't see the cards. It doesn't matter if somebody agreed to run it twice and then changed their mind to run it once. That person cannot have an inherent advantage if the equities will never change. And the equities do not change. Running it more than once only decreases the variance in that the pot will result in what is closer to the actual expectation of the hand. No one's slimy, nobody's shady, and to suggest that Mariano somehow did something with impropriety is beyond preposterous.